Welcome back to another episode of Shoulders Down. It's been a little while. This is my first solo episode since being on my annual hiking trip. I pre-recorded a bunch of stuff, and this is my first one since I've been back. So, getting back into the swing of the podcast, it feels so good to be back chatting with you and an update. So, for the fall into the new year, this podcast is going to be coming out every other week instead of weekly. And that's because I'm prioritizing some other aspects of my business. And the plan is to hopefully go back to weekly come the late winter and the spring. So stay tuned for that. I'll keep you updated. But for now, every other week on Mondays is when you can expect new Shoulders Down episodes coming out. So today we're going to talk about your dopamine menu. We're going to first talk about what is a dopamine menu. Maybe you've been hearing this term. And then we're going to talk about how this is related to intuitive eating. We're going to talk about the benefits of infusing pleasure. And then I'll share with you a little bit about what's on my dopamine menu. So, with that, we'll dive right into today's episode. What is a dopamine menu? I am no longer on Instagram, but I am on TikTok just for fun, for myself, not for my business. And I've been seeing this concept of a dopamine menu on TikTok pretty frequently. As defined by Cosmopolitan, a dopamine menu is essentially a list of activities that you can do to avoid doom scrolling while getting your dopamine levels up. So, pretty straightforward things that make you happy, give you hits of joy so that you're not turning to social media to get all your joy and pleasure. So, how this relates to intuitive eating is that diet culture often really sucks the joy and the pleasure out of life. We can't eat the things we want. We can't have our coffee the way we want. We can't spend our time the way we want because you feel like you have to burn calories or like you can't go to that social event because the food will be too tempting. So it's kind of just like these little moments of feeling deprived that add up throughout the day. Whether, maybe it starts in the morning and it's like, well, I would really like milk and sugar in my coffee, but oh, okay, I guess I'll have it black. That's a little moment of deprivation. And then maybe lunchtime comes and the office are going out to eat, but you feel like you have to eat your salad. Otherwise, you might risk being bad if you go out to eat. Another micro moment of deprivation. Then maybe, I don't know, there's like birthday cake happening in some social setting, and you're like, well, I can't have that because I have to be good. And then you're not participating in the social event. You're not getting the pleasure of connection and the pleasure of sharing a delicious sweet like a cake or something, and that adds up. So all of these little moments that might not seem like a big deal in isolation can actually really add up and lead us to feel this kind of like background level of just deprivation in our lives. And this lack of fulfillment, this feeling of deprivation can lead us to really try and seek big hits of dopamine. So the way this is being talked about on social media is like this can lead us to, doom scroll to get our dopamine. But in the context of intuitive eating work, I see this playing out as the deprivation and lack of fulfillment can lead us to try and turn to food to get big hits of dopamine. And what compounds this is that when a food is off limits, there is research that shows that off limits status actually increases the reward pathway. So sometimes you maybe hear these things like, ooh, why does it feel so good to do something so bad? And there's actually real science to back up what's going on in the brain. The pleasure reward pathway is heightened when a food is off limits. So you actually are getting a heightened dopamine response when you're eating something that you've deemed off limits or bad. So this makes it so that you really want to turn to that food because it really gives you a big influx of pleasure. And I've actually had clients say to me through our work together, like, damn, Leah, like I'll never get that same thrill from eating sweets or pizza or whatever their off limits foods was. They feel like I'll never get that same thrill again. And that's because the work I do with clients is taking these foods off the pedestal and neutralizing them, making it so it's not a bad food, it's not off limits. And my clients really experience the lack of that heightened dopamine, which can feel like a little bit sad and disorienting at first, but in the grand scheme of things, it helps to regulate that reward pathway. So you're not really feeling so pulled towards these certain foods in times where you're seeking pleasure. So, how this relates to intuitive eating, again, to really drive this home, if we can infuse pleasure throughout our days intentionally, we can create an environment of feeling more baseline fulfillment, which helps us to not turn to food as our sole source of pleasure. Food is absolutely a source of pleasure and it is a source of dopamine. But what happens often with diet culture is it becomes like our sole fixation and our sole source of pleasure and dopamine. Then that's when we see binging happen, eating past comfortable fullness. So if we can build out our pleasure menus, our dopamine menus, we can get this sense of fulfillment throughout our days, then there won't be so much weight on food to be the sole thing that's bringing us dopamine and pleasure. So I wanted to read a little something from this really cool book that I got from a friend years ago called Eat Mangoes Naked. Very cute. And the subtitle is Finding Pleasure Everywhere. And there's so much good stuff in here. It's a really fun book, but I want to read something specifically that relates to our dopamine menu conversation. So it says, measuring pleasure. Pleasure doesn't just come in slabs or chunks or big, thick increments of time. It also arrives in hints and whispers and slow installments. Sometimes I abandon something before the pleasure even has a chance to get there. At a social gathering, I might judge the people or event itself so quickly that I end up missing the pleasure. So often, I leave a party and find out that the real party happened after I left. I think that pleasure responds more to invitation than declaration. I can remember times when my attitude was, where's the pleasure? To such a degree that pleasure probably snuck out the back door. I offer these reminders. Let pleasure discover you. Put yourself in new situations and be patient. Be open for unexpected pleasures. Awaken to pleasure. Create invitations for pleasure. Wait for pleasure to appear. Invent scenarios for pleasure to appear in and set the stage. Become the pleasure that you say you're seeking. Instead of looking outside, find the pleasure inside yourself. It's there. So, what I love so much about that little passage is this idea that pleasure doesn't have to be these like grand things like going to get a massage or going on vacation. Pleasure doesn't have to be isolated for the weekends or certain big events. We can infuse pleasure in these micro moments throughout our days. And we really and sometimes it's really just about setting the stage or looking for it. So for me, that could look like last night, I was home alone. My partner goes to a game night on Wednesday nights, and I'm recording this on a Thursday. And so I had dinner by myself and I had the thought of like, what can I do to make this eating experience more pleasurable? And I put on a documentary, that Simone Biles documentary on Netflix, and sat down with my dinner. And it was so enjoyable. That really just added a little micro hit of pleasure to my pleasure cup. And again, these things all add up. So it's not like we're seeking to get all of our pleasure from food, which is what leads to eating past comfortable fullness and binging. And I actually remember on my own intuitive eating journey when I started to realize that food was becoming less exciting and I was starting to get excitement and joy from so many other things in my life besides just food. And that was a really cool moment to start seeing that shift of like, oh, like there's other ways that I can get this like jolt of excitement and satisfaction in my days. It doesn't just have to be revolving around food. So I have an alumni group of former clients and we meet once a month and we met a few days ago and we were talking about this topic of the dopamine menu and I asked my clients what are some things on their dopamine menus. So I'll share that with you, but first I'll share what's currently on my dopamine menu. So some of the things on my personal dopamine menu: clean sheets, showering, putting on a cute outfit that makes me feel put together, listening to podcasts, especially when like doing house chores and when I'm just spending time alone in the home, art journaling. So I sometimes draw different things that represent like what's going on in my life instead of writing. And that's really fun and fulfilling for me to see like a visual representation of what's happening in my life at any given moment in time. Baking and cooking, audiobooks, comfy pajamas, my cats, just like petting them, snuggling with them, my coffee shop time. There's this one coffee shop in town that I love going to so much, and I know the baristas. I don't really think they know me, but it's such like a non-snobby coffee shop, and I just love being in there and doing my work. Fresh air, people watching, weed gummies or cannabis edibles, big thing on my dopamine menu. And I like to pair those with some of these other things. I love fresh air when I'm lightly toasted on a cannabis gummy. Really lovely. Documentary while eating, as I said, like watching that Simone Biles documentary while I was eating dinner last night. Having some sort of fun drink in the afternoon as sort of like an afternoon pick me up. I like my iced matcha. Sometimes they make like iced tea with lemon and sugar, those kind of things. Or in the colder months, it's more of like a hot drink situation. Making my bed, I work at a desk and my bed is in this room. So seeing it just like neatly made with my like single cute decorative throw pillow makes me happy, though my partner freaking hates the throw pillow. He feels like it's just like another task to have to do and when you're making the bed and then at night when you're getting into the bed, but it makes me happy. Writing, creating a piece of writing, talking to a friend, and there's so many more, but that's what I'll share with you for now of what's on my dopamine menu. And I also want to offer some of the things that my alumni community shared as things on their dopamine menu collectively: podcasts, board games, making coffee the exact way you like it. One of my clients said she loves little going on little walks with her son, waking up before kids get up, not measuring the creamer, having the coffee how you like it. Another client said that. Sitting for 30 minutes and doing your crossword puzzles in the morning, cuddling with your dog on the couch, sending cute animal pictures to the family group chat, writing postcards, taking a sensory deprivation shower where it's all dark with just a candle, and clean sheets. I also said clean sheets on mine. So here are some things to start getting you thinking of what this can even look like to have a dopamine menu of your own and to really drive home why does this matter? What is even the point of intentionally infusing pleasure into your life beyond the fact that feeling fulfilled and not feeling deprived all the time can help your relationship with food because it can prevent binges because it's preventing all of the pleasure in your days coming from just food. On top of that, I see infusing pleasure into our lives as a radical stand against like being a mindless consumer and just like in the capitalist consumer machine. Because if we are walking around baseline deprived and feeling unfulfilled, then we are much more susceptible to different things being advertised to us and marketed to us because we are looking for hits of dopamine to fill voids. And that can lead us to spend our money in ways that maybe isn't necessarily so wise. It could lead us to make mindless purchases, which beyond the money aspect can just lead to like more clutter and junk in our lives and, not good for the landfills and those kind of things. And when we are baseline feeling fulfilled and connected to ourselves and our pleasure, it can lead us to feeling more empowered to be like, I don't need that thing. I'm good. I don't need this like hit of dopamine that I'm being sold in whatever format. And I think that's really freaking cool because it is a way for us to reclaim our energy and our agency in our lives instead of walking around like zombies, just like feeling kind of numbed out and unfulfilled. So that's my pitch for the importance of pleasure. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you'll consider making yourself a little dopamine menu or at least sitting with and thinking about what's on your dopamine menu. So that's all for today's solo episode. I have so many episodes coming this fall that I'm really excited to bring you. I'm going to lean a lot more into solo episodes, though we do have a few great guest episodes on deck. If you've been enjoying this podcast, it would mean so much to me if you took a moment to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That would be awesome. Those reviews really help to get the podcast out to more people and spread the anti-diet message. So if you took a moment to leave a little review, it would mean so much to me. And also, it's always nice to know, like, if you're listening, that you're listening and this is supportive for you. The podcast is kind of funny because you don't necessarily get a lot of feedback. So if you have a moment to leave a rating review on the Apple Podcast app specifically, that would be awesome. Okay. I will see you for our next episode of Shoulders Down. Thanks so much for listening.